Hi, this is Blake.
Hi, this is Cameron. We welcome you to yet another episode of TrustTalks.
Today, we're diving deep into something I think pretty much every business struggles with, which is how to make sure all your security and compliance efforts actually help you achieve your goals.
Right.
Instead of it feeling like they're holding you back.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Absolutely.
We've got a great set of resources from the TrustCloud GRC Launchpad to kind of guide us through this conversation.
Awesome.
So let's just jump right in.
Yeah, I'm excited to dig into these, especially because so many businesses, I think, just see compliance and security as these big, scary, like roadblocks, things that slow them down.
Yeah, for sure. And that's what I think is so interesting about this particular article from TrustCloud. They use this phrase, harmonious alignment.
Yes.
And I just love that.
I love that phrase.
When they're talking about compliance, security, and your business goals.
Yeah, because it really is about harmony, right? It's not about one side dominating the others.
Right.
It's about finding that sweet spot where they all work together. Yeah.
What I find fascinating is this article almost flips the script. It says, figure out your business goals first.
Okay.
And then look at how compliance and security can support those goals.
Okay, that's interesting.
Instead
that's a
of
good point.
Compliance being this external force that dictates what you have to do, you're kind of using it strategically to help you get where you want to go.
Right. Instead of being reactive, you're being proactive.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And they dive into some really practical strategies for making this happen. One that I found really insightful was this idea of embracing something called a GRC framework.
Okay, GRC framework.
Yeah.
For those of us who don't speak fluent acronym, break that down for us.
Okay, so think of it this way. A good GRC framework is like a GPS for your business. It helps you navigate this complex world of regulations and risks while keeping your eyes on the prize, or business goals.
Right.
It's about integrating governance, risk management, and compliance into a single system that works together.
Instead of these things all being siloed off in different departments.
Gotcha. So instead of them being separate, they all work together.
Exactly. And that's when you start to see some really interesting synergies. For example, the article highlights how investing in really robust security measures can actually boost customer trust, which can then lead to increased sales and brand loyalty.
It's almost like, in a way, it's a competitive advantage to have strong security.
It is.
It's not just about, like, avoiding fines or data breaches. It's about actually making your business stronger because you're taking these things seriously.
It absolutely is.
Yeah.
And it speaks to that bigger picture of how aligning these things can create a virtuous cycle.
Right.
When security, compliance, and business goals are all pulling in the same direction, that's when everybody wins.
Totally. And speaking of pulling in the same direction, the article also really emphasizes the importance of getting everybody on board with this vision, right?
Yes.
From the CEO all the way down to, like, the newest intern. Everyone needs to understand why these things are important.
Absolutely. It's about creating a culture where these things are seen as enablers, not blockers.
Okay, so how do you actually do that?
Right.
They talk about things like employee training, but let's be honest. Most compliance training is about as exciting as watching paint dry.
Oh, it's the worst.
How do you make it so that people actually care?
That's the million-dollar question.
Right.
The article suggests, using a variety of different methods, interactive simulations, quizzes, maybe even some gamification.
Okay.
It's about making the training relevant to what people do every day and showing them how these concepts actually apply to their work.
Okay, so it's not just about throwing a bunch of policies at people. It's about showing them the why behind it all.
The why,
Yeah,
exactly. Yeah. And you're empowering them to be a part of the solution.
Yeah.
They also talk about leveraging technology to help manage all of this.
Thank goodness.
Right.
Because trying to keep up with all the regulations and security threats manually would be a nightmare.
It would be impossible.
Yep.
But the key is to use the technology strategically.
Right.
Not just as a Band-Aid.
So what kind of tools are we talking about here?
Well, there's compliance management systems that can help you automate a lot of the tracking and reporting that you need to do for regulations. There's security tech, like threat detection software, that can help you identify and respond to potential attacks before they become major problems.
Don't forget about business intelligence platforms that can help you analyze data and spot trends that might signal compliance risks or security vulnerabilities. I mean, the article goes into a lot more detail about those in other sections, so I'm definitely going to be checking those out.
Me too.
But before we get too deep into the weeds of, like, the tech stuff, I kind of want to shift gears and talk about, like, the practical steps the article outlines for aligning your business goals with security and compliance.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's interesting how they start with really understanding each component individually.
Yeah.
And they suggest understanding your business goals first.
Right.
It's like they're saying, don't even think about compliance until you know exactly what you're trying to achieve as a business.
Right.
Which I think is smart.
It is smart because you can't align things if you don't know what you're aligning to.
Exactly.
Right. So that's step one. Figure out what you want to do. Then you can figure out how security and compliance fit in.
Yeah, I love that approach. And then they go on to talk about identifying areas where your compliance, security, and business goals overlap or depend on each other. Like that example we talked about earlier where strong security leads to increased customer trust, and then that ultimately boosts your bottom line.
Exactly. And the more you can identify these overlaps, the more you can start to see security and compliance as assets rather than burdens.
Right, for sure. And then, of course, it all goes back to employee training, making sure that everybody understands not just what they need to do, but why they need to do it.
The why, yes.
Right.
Absolutely. And that's where, interactive simulations and gamification and all those fun things come into play.
Right. You got to make it fun. You got to make it relevant.
Got to make it fun.
You got to make it stick.
You got to make it stick.
Right.
Exactly. Because when employees feel like they're part of the solution and not just, being told what to do, you're much more likely to create a culture of compliance and security that's sustainable for the long term.
Okay, so we've talked about understanding each component individually, identifying those overlaps,
Yes.
and engaging employees.
Yes.
What else is on the article's how-to list?
Well, one thing they do is provide some really compelling case studies from different industries. They highlight a financial institution, a healthcare provider, and a manufacturing company.
Okay.
And I think what's so interesting is that these very diverse examples show that aligning security, compliance, and business goals isn't just limited to one specific industry or company size.
Right. It's a universal approach.
It is.
It doesn't matter if you're a startup or a Fortune 500 company.
Exactly.
These principles hold true. And speaking of things that hold true across the board, the article also highlights some common pitfalls to avoid.
Yes.
But we're going to save that juicy stuff for part 2 of our deep dive.
Yes, we are.
So stay tuned. We'll be right back after a quick break.
We'll be right back.
And we are back for part 2 of our deep dive on aligning all things business goals with compliance and security.
It's good to be back.
Yeah, it's good to be back. In part 1, we really focused on the why. Like why it's so important to see these areas as working together and supporting each other rather than like competing forces. We talked about finding that harmonious alignment.
Yes.
And, we started to unpack some of the strategies from the TrustCloud article, but now I'm kind of ready to get like even more practical.
Yeah, me too. Let's get tactical.
Yeah, let's roll up our sleeves and talk tactics. So the article, obviously offers a ton of advice, but one thing that really stood out to me was this whole idea of actually embedding compliance and security into your everyday business processes. So it's not enough to just have policies that are gathering dust on a shelf somewhere.
Nope, not at all.
You got to weave these considerations into how you do business.
Absolutely.
So paint me a picture. What does that actually look like in practice?
Okay, so let's say, for example, you're a software company and you're developing a new app. Instead of treating security as an afterthought, like, oh, we got to go back and make sure this is secure.
Right.
You build security testing into your development process from day one.
So making sure your developers are trained on secure coding practices.
Exactly.
Running vulnerability scans regularly, that kind of thing.
All of that, yep. By baking security into the process, you're catching potential issues early on before they snowball into big problems.
You're shifting left. It's like being proactive instead of reactive.
Exactly. That's a great way to put it.
Yeah, I like that.
And you can apply the same approach to compliance as well. Let's say you're a company that handles sensitive customer data. You build in data privacy considerations into your marketing campaigns, into your product development right from the start.
Right. So instead of just hoovering up as much data as possible, you're thinking about what you actually need.
Exactly.
How you're going to safeguard it. Being transparent with your customers about how their data is being used.
All of those things, yep. It's about making compliance and security core parts of your business decisions, not just boxes to tick at the end.
Yeah, so it's like a mindset shift.
It is.
Seeing these things as integral to your success, not as obstacles.
Exactly. Precisely. Now, another really key point the article brings up is the importance of clear roles and responsibilities when it comes to compliance and security.
Yeah, that who's in charge thing can get real messy real quick if it's not defined.
Oh, yeah. Everyone needs to know who's accountable for what, who's responsible for developing policies, who's implementing them, who's in charge of monitoring, all of that.
And it's not just about having, like, assigned roles on paper.
No.
Right. It's about making sure people have the authority and the resources to actually do their jobs well.
I completely agree. If you say, hey, you're responsible for security awareness training, but they don't have a budget
Right.
or the time to do it properly, well, then you're setting them up to fail.
Okay. So we've talked about embedding compliance and security into your processes, clarifying roles and responsibilities. I kind of want to talk about the human element of all this. We touched on employee training a little bit earlier.
Yeah.
But I feel like there's more to it than just like, check, you did your training.
Definitely. There is a lot more to it. The article really stresses how important it is to create a culture where compliance and security are actually valued and understood.
Yeah, because at the end of the day, I mean, even with like the best tech and the best processes, humans are still like the weakest link. We're going to make mistakes.
Totally.
We're going to click phishing links, forget to update our passwords.
Absolutely. Human error is a huge factor in a lot of security breaches and compliance failures.
So how do you combat that? Like, how do you create that culture of awareness and vigilance?
Well, ongoing security awareness training is super important, but it can't just be those boring, like, once-a-year presentations.
Death by PowerPoint.
Yeah, death by PowerPoint. The article suggests mixing things up using interactive simulations, quizzes, gamification, anything you can do to make security and compliance more engaging and memorable.
Make it fun, make it relevant, make it stick.
Exactly.
Right.
It's also crucial to communicate regularly with employees about security and compliance.
Yeah.
Updates, new threats, best practices, all of that.
Just like keep it top of mind, basically.
Yes, keep it top of mind.
Not just a once-a-year thing.
Exactly. You want to create an environment where people are constantly thinking about these things and it just becomes part of how you do business.
Yeah.
And where people feel empowered to speak up if they see something that's not quite right.
Yes, and speaking up is so important.
It's so important.
They also talk about the importance of having, like, clear reporting mechanisms in place.
Yes.
For security incidents and compliance concerns.
Yes, absolutely.
So like anonymous reporting hotlines or, you know, those online portals where people can raise a flag without fear of getting in trouble.
Exactly. You want to create a culture where people feel comfortable coming forward no matter what.
Right. And of course, once people do come forward, it's super important to have like a solid process in place.
Absolutely.
For actually investigating and responding to those reports.
Couldn't agree more. You can't just have a reporting mechanism and then ignore it.
Right, right.
That undermines the whole thing.
Exactly. Okay, so we've covered a lot here. We've talked about embedding compliance and security into processes, clarifying roles and responsibilities, fostering a culture of awareness, and establishing those, you know, reporting mechanisms.
Yes.
But I think there's one more crucial piece that we need to address, which is measurement and monitoring.
The data.
Right. The data.
Yeah.
Can't manage what you don't measure.
You can't, exactly. The article really stresses the importance of having those key performance indicators, KPIs, that allow you to track how you're doing.
Okay, so like concretely, what kind of things would you measure?
It's going to depend on your specific goals and your industry, of course.
Okay.
But you might track things like the number of security incidents that are reported, how long it takes you to fix vulnerabilities, employee completion rates for security awareness training, or how many compliance audits you pass.
So you're using data to get a clear picture of like how you're actually doing, both in terms of like the compliance and security, but also in terms of how those efforts are actually contributing to your business goals.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. And you're using that data to continuously improve.
And I'm assuming you're sharing that data with key stakeholders.
Absolutely.
Right. Your leadership team, your board, your employees, to kind of show like, hey, this is the value of what we're doing here.
Transparency is key. It builds trust, and it reinforces the message that this is everybody's responsibility.
I love it. Okay, so let's do like a super quick recap of all the tactical advice that we've covered here in this part.
Okay, so we talked about embedding compliance and security into your business processes, having those clear roles and responsibilities, fostering a culture of awareness through training and communication, establishing those robust reporting mechanisms, and then using data to actually track and measure how you're doing.
Wow. That's a lot.
It's a lot. But I think the key takeaway here is that aligning compliance, security, and business goals, it's not about checking boxes or following some rigid set of rules. It's about creating a more holistic and integrated approach.
It's about them working together.
Exactly.
Yeah, I love that. And I think that's a good note to maybe move on to part 3.
Yes.
Where we can talk about some of those common pitfalls the article mentions.
Those sneaky traps that can trip you up.
Yes, those sneaky traps that can trip you up even when you have, like, the best intentions. So stick with us. We'll be back in a flash to help you navigate those treacherous waters.
We'll be right back.
And we are back for the final part of our deep dive, part 3. Can you believe it?
I know, it's flown by.
I know, it really has. We've covered so much ground already.
We have.
But I'm really excited to dig into these potential pitfalls that the article talks about.
Yes.
Because, obviously this stuff is not always easy peasy.
It's not, no.
There are going to be challenges. There are going to be obstacles.
Absolutely.
So let's talk about them.
Yeah, let's do it.
So one pitfall that really resonated with me, that I've definitely seen in the past, is that whole check-the-box mentality.
Oh, yes, very common.
You know what I mean? Where it's just like, okay, we have to do this because the regulations say we have to do it, but we're just going to do the bare minimum to get by.
Right, just check the box and move on.
Exactly.
But as they point out in the article, that is a recipe for disaster.
Yeah.
Because compliance and security, they're not static. They're not like a one-and-done kind of thing.
Right. Things change constantly.
They do, constantly evolving.
Yeah, you got new regulations popping up, new threats, new technologies.
The risks you face as a business are changing all the time.
Exactly.
So if you're just checking boxes, you're always going to be behind the curve.
Always playing catch up.
Always playing catch up. Always reacting instead of being proactive.
And that can leave you wide open to all sorts of problems. Fines, data breaches.
Reputational damage.
Oh, yeah, your reputation. That can take years to build and seconds to destroy.
Yeah, it really can.
So how do you avoid that trap? How do you shift from that, like, check-the-box mentality to a more, like, holistic and integrated approach?
Well, it goes back to what we've been talking about throughout this entire deep dive, right?
Alignment.
Alignment, you need to see compliance and security as core parts of your business strategy.
Right.
Not just as separate items on a to-do list.
It's got to be woven into the fabric of your organization.
It does, exactly. And when you do that, when it's embedded in your culture, it becomes everybody's responsibility, not just the compliance officer's job or the security team's job.
Right. Everyone has a role to play.
Everyone does. And that's when you really start to see those synergies that we were talking about,
Right.
where those security enhancements lead to business benefits.
Yeah, totally. And it creates a much more resilient organization overall.
It really does.
You're able to adapt to change more quickly. You're more prepared to handle, like, whatever comes your way.
Exactly. Speaking of, organizational dynamics,
Yep.
Another potential pitfall the article highlights is that lack of communication and collaboration between different departments.
The silo effect.
The silo effect.
So common.
So common.
So detrimental.
Oh, so detrimental.
You've got compliance of doing their thing. Security's over here doing their thing.
Yep.
Business units are like, we're just trying to run the business.
Don't bother us.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And they're not talking to each other.
Yeah.
And when that happens,
Chaos ensues.
yeah, chaos ensues.
It's a recipe for disaster. You end up with security measures that conflict with business processes, compliance requirements that nobody understands.
There's a whole lot of frustration.
A lot of frustration.
Wasted time, wasted money.
Absolutely.
So how do you break down those silos and get everyone on the same page?
Well, communication is key. Open, honest, frequent communication.
Right. Like, how do you do that, though? Like, what are some practical things that people can do?
Well, one thing is to have regular cross-functional meetings where people from compliance, security, and the business units can get together, share updates, talk about challenges, brainstorm solutions.
Yeah, make it a conversation.
Not a conversation. And it's not just about formal meetings either. It's about fostering a culture of open communication where people feel comfortable going to each other with questions or concerns. Things like shared dashboards, instant messaging groups, or even just a culture where people feel like they can pick up the phone and call someone in another department to clarify something.
It's about building those relationships.
It is.
Building those bridges.
Breaking down those silos.
Right, exactly. So communication is key.
Communication is key.
And it seems like kind of a no-brainer, but it's something that a lot of organizations struggle with.
It really is. Now, they also caution against over-relying on technology.
Okay, that's interesting because we talk about how helpful technology can be, but I guess it's not like a cure-all.
It's not a magic bullet.
Right.
Technology can be incredibly powerful, as we've discussed,
Right.
but it's not a silver bullet.
You can't just buy a fancy new compliance management system
Right.
or some state-of-the-art threat detection tool and think that, like, all your problems are going to disappear.
It just doesn't work that way.
Yeah, technology is a tool.
It's a tool.
It needs to be part of a broader strategy.
Absolutely. And most importantly, it needs to be supported by people and processes.
Right, because at the end of the day,
Yeah.
it's people who make the decisions, people who interpret the data, people who are ultimately going to determine whether your compliance and security efforts are successful or not.
Exactly. You can't automate everything.
Yeah.
Human judgment and critical thinking are still essential.
So don't fall into that trap of thinking that technology alone will solve all your compliance and security challenges.
You won't.
It's about finding that balance.
Exactly. Finding that balance between human intelligence and technological capabilities.
Yeah. Love it. All right, so we've talked about some potential pitfalls to avoid. But before we wrap up this whole deep dive, I want to circle back to something that you said earlier about everyone having a role to play in compliance and security. Yeah, it's not just the compliance officer's job. It's not just the security team's job.
Everybody's responsibility.
It's everyone's responsibility.
Okay.
So the article focuses a lot on that organizational alignment piece.
Right.
Like, how do you align compliance and security with your business goals at, like, a company level? But I'm kind of curious about, like, what about personal alignment? How can each of us, in our own roles, contribute to creating a culture where security and compliance are seen as, like, helping us, not hindering us?
Right. How can we make sure that our actions are aligned with those goals?
Exactly.
It's a great question.
So what can we do in our day-to-day work to make a difference?
I think, honestly, it starts with a mindset shift. Instead of viewing compliance and security as someone else's problem, we need to see it as a shared responsibility.
It's about being proactive, asking questions, speaking up if you see something that's not quite right, constantly learning and evolving as, the world changes around us.
Exactly. Be engaged, be accountable.
I love that. All right, so I think that brings us to the end of our deep dive.
I think so, too.
We covered a lot.
We did. We covered a lot of ground.
From the why to the how.
The what to watch out for.
Yes, the what to watch out for, all the pitfalls.
All the things.
All the things.
Okay.
So hopefully you found this helpful, maybe even a little bit inspiring.
I hope so.
And as always, we encourage you to check out the full article from TrustCloud and all the other great resources they have on their GRC Launchpad for, even more information on this topic.
It's a great resource.
It really is. So until next time, happy aligning, everybody.
Aligning.